My MOM took my daughter's $1,600 MacBook and handed it to my brother's son. He's the grandchild who'll actually do something with his life. My daughter reached for it. MOM pulled it away. Touch it again, and I'm not your grandma. My brother smirked. I looked at him. Keep that sentence. You'll need it later. Her smile vanished. Touch it again, and I'm not your grandma. My mother said those exact words while she ripped my 12-year-old daughter's $1,600 laptop out of her hands and dropped it into my nephew's lap like a prize she'd been saving all night to give away. He's the grandchild who will actually do something with his life. My daughter Ren had put $320 of her own babysitting money into that machine. Her unfinished story was still open on the screen. My brother smirked into his drink. My father kept his eyes on his plate. I didn't raise my voice. I looked straight at my mother and said, "Keep that sentence. You'll need it later." Then I took my daughter home. 9 days after that, something landed on my screen at work that none of them saw coming. And from the second my mother's hand closed around that laptop, every proud word out of her mouth had been quietly building the room where it would all come apart. My name is Mara Collins. I'm 37 years old, and this is family favoritism drama for anyone who has ever told their job in the family was to keep the peace. If a story like this finds you tonight, you're not the only one sitting with it. Drop a comment, subscribe, and stay with me because I promise you this one has an ending worth waiting for. But first, let me show you the counter where I spend my weekdays, because everything that happened afterward runs straight through it. I work customer operations for Gear Swap Electronics, a chain of trade-in and repair shops scattered across the Columbus suburbs. I started there part-time when Ren was still in kindergarten, mostly because the schedule worked around her school pickup, and stayed because it turned out I was genuinely good at the one part of the job most people find tedious. People bring me their old phones, their old laptops, their old versions of themselves, really, and I tell them what those things are actually worth. I check serial numbers against sales records. I match devices to receipts that don't quite match the story attached to them. Every morning before the doors open, I scroll the local resale listings so our prices track the real market instead of the one people wish existed. I have done this job for 6 years, and it has taught me exactly one thing I would bet my house on. People lie. Machines keep records. A man will stand at my counter and tell me his laptop is barely used while the hinge hangs loose enough to see daylight through it and the keyboard shines in 3 specific spots from 1,000 hours of typing. A woman will swear a phone belonged to her late husband while the account still logged into it carries a stranger's name and a stranger's photos. I don't argue with either of them. I've learned there's no percentage in it. I just turn the machine over, read what it actually says about itself, and let the record do the talking instead of me. 6 months ago, a man in a golf shirt slid a MacBook across my counter and told me, with total confidence, that it had never left its box. I turned it over once, thumbed open the settings, and read him his own login history back to him. 411 hours of use, mostly between 11 at night and 2 in the morning. Mostly a game called something he clearly didn't want his wife hearing about across the counter. He didn't argue either. He just paid the lower price and left a little faster than he'd walked in. It cuts the other way just as often, which is the part people never expect. A woman came in once convinced her late father's old camera was worthless, embarrassed to even be asking, holding it out to me like it was already trash. She was apologizing for bringing inside. I turned it over, checked the serial number against a registry I keep bookmarked for exactly this reason, and told her it was a limited production run worth 11 times what she thought she was walking in with. She cried right there at my counter, and it had nothing to do with the money. It had to do with somebody finally telling her the truth about something she loved instead of the easy, convenient version of it. That's the job. At Gear Swap, being good at reading what a machine actually says made me the person new hires get sent to when a story doesn't line up with a serial number, in either direction. In my family, I had a different job title. I was the daughter who never needs anything. I got divorced in the spring of 2021, when Ren was 7. Her father moved 2 states away for work that same year and settled into the kind of long-distance parenting that shows up reliably at Christmas and unreliably everywhere else, which is its own quiet grief I won't spend the story on, because Ren has never once treated it as the wound in her life. I didn't ask my parents for a dime through any of it. I refinanced the house myself. I built a budget on a legal pad at my kitchen table and stuck to it. I kept the roof over our heads without anyone's help, and I heard my mother tell her friends how proud she was. Not of me exactly. Of the fact that I never called. Mara's always been fine on her own, she liked to say, the exact way you describe a reliable appliance that never needs servicing. Meanwhile, in 2019, my brother Todd borrowed $2,000 from me for a vending machine business he was positive was about to take off. You'll get it back, sis. Give it 18 months. The machines limped along until 2022, when the whole operation folded quietly and the machines themselves got sold off for parts, 3 of them still sitting unclaimed in a self-storage unit he stopped paying rent on, according to Cole, who told me once in passing that he'd gone with his dad to clear it out and found nothing inside but a folding chair and a stack of unopened vending inventory going stale. The money never came back. Nobody in my family has mentioned it since, including me, because mentioning it would have made things awkward, and my role in that family was to absorb awkward things so nobody else had to feel them. In January of 2023, my parents' water heater died in the coldest week of the year. I wrote the check myself, $1,400, sitting at their kitchen table while my mother made coffee, like nothing unusual was happening. 2 months later, at a cousin's baby shower, I listened to her tell my aunt that Todd had taken care of it. He was standing 4 feet away, holding a plate of deviled eggs. He didn't correct her. He just tipped his cup at me across the room, like the two of us were in on some private joke together. That's how it worked. My mother, Evelyn, wrote the family story, and the family story needed a hero. Todd was 41, 4 years older than me, and every one of his ventures had failed on a schedule you could set a watch to. The vending machines. A cryptocurrency venture in 2024 that he still won't fully explain to anyone, including, I suspect, himself. And none of it ever mattered, because in my mother's telling, Todd was always one breakthrough away from arriving. Her checks made sure that particular story never had to survive contact with reality for very long. And then there was my father, Frank, 71 years old, a retired machinist, married to my mother for 46 years. He is the quietest man I have ever known. Every month of that marriage, for as long as I can remember, he has sat at their kitchen table under the same yellow overhead light and balanced their checkbook by hand, lips moving slightly over the numbers, saying almost nothing out loud while he does it. He noticed everything and had a vote in almost none of it. I used to think that silence was a kind of weakness in him. I would learn, eventually, exactly how much that quiet man had been counting the entire time, and exactly what he planned to do with the total once he'd finished adding it up. Then there was the third generation. My nephew Cole, 14 years old, the family's crown prince. My mother could recite his shoe size, his batting average from 2 summers back, the college she'd already half decided on for him before he'd finished 8th grade. She kept a folder of his old school photos on the hallway table, updated every September like clockwork, while a single school photo of Ren from 3 years back still sat crooked in its frame in the guest room nobody used. And my daughter Ren sat at the far end of every family dinner in the chair by the china cabinet and got asked, on a good night, exactly nothing. Driving home from one of those dinners, Ren said it out loud the plain way kids do, staring out the window instead of at me. Grandma remembers Cole's shoe size, Mom. That was the whole sentence. Then she went back to watching the streetlights go by like she hadn't just handed me the entire shape of our family in 11 words. I should tell you, too, that none of this started with Ren. It started with me, decades before her, in a version I'd spent 30 years quietly filing under old news. When I was 9, Todd got a 10-speed bicycle for making the honor roll one single semester. I made the honor roll every semester for 4 straight years running and got a hug and a comment about how I'd always been the responsible one, said in the exact tone you'd use to compliment a piece of furniture, for holding up well. I didn't resent him for the bicycle back then. I resented, without having the words for it yet, the specific shape of the sentence that came my way instead of one. I filed that memory away for 28 years without once connecting it to anything. It took watching the same math happen to my own daughter, at the same kitchen table, to finally see the whole pattern laid end to end. For years I told myself favoritism was just hurt feelings, uncomfortable, unfair, survivable. I thought the worst thing it could do was sting for an evening and fade by morning. I was wrong about that in a way that took me most of a year to fully understand. Favoritism has a budget. I just hadn't been shown the ledger yet. Here's who my daughter actually is so you understand exactly what got taken from her that night and not just what it cost in dollars. Ren is 12. In a room full of adults, she goes quiet and studies her own hands like they belong to someone she's still getting to know. On a page, she is fearless. She writes a serialized fantasy story online under the name Ren Writes at Midnight, a girl who talks to lighthouses, a found family scattered across a coastline that doesn't exist anywhere but in my daughter's head. Just under 3,000 people follow it. 3,000 strangers, most of them grown women based on the comments, who wait for her every single week the way other people wait for a favorite show. She posts a new chapter every Friday night. It's a ritual by now, not a habit. She reads it out loud to me first, curled up on the end of my bed with her knees pulled to her chest, and then at exactly 8 o'clock she hits publish and watches the comments start arriving in real time like she's opening presents she wrapped herself. One reader wrote underneath chapter 14, "You update Fridays or I riot." This story is the best part of my week. My daughter, the invisible grandchild at every family table she's ever sat at, is the best part of a stranger's week, every week, and doesn't need a single person in that family to know it to keep doing it. The laptop came into our lives in August of 2025. $1,600. She'd been writing every chapter on a school-issued loaner that stuttered, froze, and occasionally died mid-sentence without warning, and I'd been quietly saving towards something better for months without telling her. Then one evening, she slid an envelope across our kitchen table without a word of preamble. $320, folded flat, her careful handwriting on the front spelling out exactly what it was for. A whole summer of babysitting the Delaney twins 2 streets over, saved instead of spent, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon from June through the end of August, $12 an hour, counted out in cash by their mother at the end of each week and dropped straight into a mason jar on Wren's dresser rather than spent on a single thing along the way. "So it's ours," she said. "But mostly mine." I took the envelope. Some parents would have handed it right back and told her to keep it for something fun. I understood immediately what she was actually buying, and it wasn't a laptop. She was buying a share. A stake. A say. I wasn't going to take that away from her by being generous about it. I've watched enough people hand over something they genuinely earned only to have it treated as a gift instead, quietly stripped of the ownership they'd actually paid for, and I wasn't about to let my own daughter learn that particular lesson from her own mother before anyone else got the chance to teach it to her. At the store, I did what 6 years behind a trade-in counter has permanently rewired me to do with anything expensive that enters my house. I kept the original box because the serial number printed on the bottom flap is the one thing a receipt alone can't always prove. I filed the paper receipt in the kitchen drawer, where I keep every receipt that actually matters, underneath the drawer liner where it wouldn't fade in the light. And before we'd even gotten the machine home from the store, sitting in the parking lot with the engine still running, I turned on automatic cloud backup and watched the little wheel spin until it confirmed itself. "Habit," I told her, when she asked why I was fiddling with settings before we'd even left the lot. It wasn't only habit. It was 6 years of watching what happens to people who don't have a record of what they actually own. In December, she was carrying it to the couch to keep writing while I made dinner, tripped over the edge of the living room rug, and the corner of the lid caught the coffee table hard enough that I heard it from the kitchen. A dent pressed into the aluminum, small and curved, shaped almost exactly like a crescent moon, sitting low on the left corner of the lid. She cried like she'd broken a promise instead of a laptop. I sat down on the floor next to her and told her the truth the way my job had taught it to me. "Sweetheart, listen to me. Brand new means it belongs to a store. A dent means it's yours." She thought about that for a long moment, wiping her face with the back of her wrist. Then she went and got a holographic sticker of an axolotl, pink, grinning, absurd, and pressed it carefully over the dent, and declared the machine officially, permanently hers. From that afternoon on, that crescent-shaped dent wasn't damage in our house. It was a signature. I didn't tell her, that night, the other half of what my job had taught me about dents, that at my own counter, a dent like that one drops a machine's trade-in value by exactly $40 to $60, no negotiation, because a mark is a mark no matter what story you tell yourself about how it got there. I let her have the sweeter version instead. Some truths are only useful at a trade-in counter, and some are only useful at your own kitchen table, and knowing which one you're standing at is half the job, in electronics and everywhere else. By March, Chapter 14 had been up for 2 weeks and Chapter 15 was half written, sitting open in a document on that same laptop most nights after her homework was done. She also had a school assignment she was actually excited about for once, a family history project, and she'd chosen on her own to interview my father about his 30 years running a machine shop floor out of every possible relative she could have picked for the assignment. When I asked her why him specifically, she said, "Because nobody ever asks Grandpa anything. They just ask him to pass things." That sentence has stayed with me longer than almost anything else from that whole spring. She spent the better part of a week writing her interview questions out by hand on index cards before she was satisfied with them. Question 4, in her handwriting, read, "Grandpa, what did your hands smell like after work?" That's the question that brought the laptop to Sunday dinner on March the 8th. She packed it into her backpack herself, careful with the corners the way you'd handle something alive. My parents live 11 miles from us, about 15 minutes down a stretch of Tulane Road, in the same house I grew up in. Wren asked me twice in the car whether she should bring the laptop in with the interview questions or leave both in the back seat until after dinner, the way you'd ask about handling something breakable, and I told her to bring it in, because I genuinely didn't see any reason not to yet. That's the detail I keep coming back to. I had no reason not to yet. That Sunday there were 6 of us around the table, my mother, my father, Todd, Cole, Wren, and me with pot roast in the middle of it because it is always pot roast on a Sunday at my mother's table, has been since before I could talk. For the first half of that dinner, I want to be honest with you, it was good. Genuinely good. Wren set the laptop up at the corner of the table, angled the built-in camera toward her grandfather, and pressed record. And my father did something I almost never get to see him do at that table. He talked. Really talked. She asked him question 4, and he laughed. Actually laughed, a full sound I could count on one hand the number of times I'd heard from him in the last decade, and leaned in toward the little camera lens like it was an old friend. "Grease and pennies," he said. My hands smelled like grease and pennies for 30 years straight. Still catch a whiff of it sometimes, and it takes me right back to the floor. Ren checked her index card for question 5. What's something you made that you're still proud of, Grandpa? My father thought about that one longer than the first. A jig for a customer once, back in the 80s. Fella needed a part machine that nobody else in 3 counties would even attempt, said it couldn't be done to spec. Took me 11 tries. He shrugged, the closest thing to bragging I'd ever heard out of him. 12th one held. He shook my hand right there on the shop floor. Best handshake I ever got in 30 years. Better than my own wedding, and I'll deny saying that to your grandmother if you repeat it. Ren laughed so hard at that she had to steady the laptop with both hands so it wouldn't slide off her knee. Ren grinned at the screen. My mother refilled the gravy boat without looking up, which from her counts as a form of approval. Even Todd seemed, for a few minutes, almost human, laughing at the right places, asking my father a follow-up question about his old shop foreman that actually sounded like genuine curiosity. When the interview wrapped, Ren stopped the recording, but instead of closing the lid, she pulled up her writing document, Chapter 15, and turned the screen so her grandfather could see a paragraph she was proud of, a line about an old man and a lighthouse that doesn't speak but somehow still gets understood. My father read it slowly, mouthing a few of the words the same careful way he mouths numbers over his check register, and when he finished he looked up at her and said, quietly enough that I almost missed it under the table noise, "You write like somebody who pays attention for a living." Ren went pink to her ears and didn't say anything back, just took the compliment the way she takes most things that actually matter to her, by going very still and holding on to it. The document sat there glowing in the middle of the table between the serving dishes, ordinary as a photograph passed around after dinner. Across the table, Todd set down his fork. Cole's Chromebook died again this week, he said to no one in particular, loud enough to make sure the whole table heard it. Kid can't even do his homework right now. I remember thinking in the half-second before everything happened that it was an oddly specific thing to announce out of nowhere. Cole didn't look up from his plate. His actual school Chromebook was sitting on the table right next to him, screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern from one corner, and he pulled it an inch closer to his own body like he wanted it to quietly disappear before anyone looked at it too closely. Some kids get the good machines, I guess, Todd added, still not looking directly at anyone, which is exactly the kind of sentence a person says when they very much want someone else to look somewhere specific for them. My mother's eyes moved from Cole's cracked Chromebook to Ren's glowing laptop and back again. I watched it happen in real time. I just didn't understand yet what I was actually watching unfold 3 feet from my own plate. She stood up. She walked around the table, and she took my daughter's laptop directly out of my daughter's hands. Ren's fingers were still resting on the keyboard when it left them. She held on for half a second out of pure reflex, the way you'd grab back at anything mid-fall, and my mother pulled it free anyway and said the words while she pulled. "Touch it again, and I'm not your grandma." Then she turned, crossed the room, and dropped the open machine into Cole's lap like a prize handed out at a county fair. Chapter 15 was still glowing on the screen. My daughter's sentences, sitting in my nephew's lap. "He's the grandchild who'll actually do something with his life," she announced to the whole table, the way you'd announce a toast. Todd smirked into his drink. My father kept his eyes fixed on his plate like the pot roast had suddenly become extremely interesting. "And Cole, I will never forget this part as long as I live." Cole's hands stayed flat on his own thighs. He did not touch it. The laptop simply balanced there on his knees, open, glowing, and the boy it had supposedly just been given to sat perfectly still, like something hot had been set down on him, and he was waiting to be told it was safe to move. Ren didn't cry. That was the part that frightened me most in the moment. She looked at the laptop, then at her grandmother, and then she folded her hands very deliberately in her lap, and her face did something I had never once seen it do before. It closed, like a door being pulled shut quietly from the inside, with no slam to it at all. Everyone at that table was waiting for me to explode. I could feel it, the way you feel a room holding its breath. A scene. Tears. A shouting match my mother could retell for years afterward with herself cast as the reasonable one standing in the eye of somebody else's storm. I stood up instead. I pushed my chair in until it sat straight against the table. And I looked at my mother. "Keep that sentence," I said. "You'll need it later." Her smile flickered and then vanished, not because she understood what I meant, but precisely because she didn't, and my mother hates absolutely nothing more than a line she can't immediately read the ending of. "Is that supposed to scare me?" she said, with a small laugh aimed at her audience rather than at me. I didn't answer. I got Ren's coat. I got Ren. And we walked out, and I closed the front door so gently behind us that the latch barely clicked into place. I've thought about that click more than almost anything else from that whole year. A slammed door is a fight. A quiet one is a decision. In the car, Ren was silent for 6 full minutes. I counted them off on the dashboard clock because I didn't trust myself to be the one who spoke first. We were stopped at the light on Route 9, my hands at 10, and 2 exactly the way I've held a wheel since I was 16, when she finally said something to the window instead of to me. Grandma didn't take a laptop. She took my half. $320. A whole summer of the Delaney twins. Her half. I kept my hands on the wheel and the car steady between the lines, and I understood, sitting in the dark of that intersection with the light still red, that this had already stopped being about a machine. My mother hadn't stolen a laptop from a 12-year-old. She had said my daughter's price out loud, in front of the whole family, and my daughter, 12 years old, in the passenger seat of my car, had already finished doing the math on it before we'd even reached the second stoplight. By morning, my family had already started telling me exactly how I was supposed to feel about it. The first text arrived at 7:40 on Monday, before I'd even finished my coffee. You embarrass me in front of your father. Cole needs it for his future. You can afford another one. That was the entire message from my mother. Read it again if you need to, the way I did, 3 times standing at my own kitchen counter. There's no apology anywhere in it. There isn't even the shape of one waiting to be found if you squint. In 3 short sentences, she had assigned herself the injury, my nephew the need, and me the bill. That's not carelessness. That's fluency. My mother has been speaking that exact language her entire adult life, and I'd simply never been on the receiving end of a sentence structured quite that cleanly before. 10 minutes later, my brother checked in. It's just a laptop, sis. Don't be dramatic. A thumbs up emoji underneath it. 20 years of my money quietly propping up his failures, and 20 years of my silence about it, and I'd apparently earned a single thumbs up in exchange. I called my mother once that day. Once. I kept my voice level and asked her, plainly, to return Ren's laptop, using those exact words on purpose. Ren's laptop. It's Cole's now, she said, like she was correcting a small factual error on my part. Ren paid for part of it herself, Mom. $320 of her own money. Then I'm sure she'll earn it back. That's a good lesson for her, honestly, learning that things don't always work out the way you planned. She said it in the exact voice she uses for handing out advice nobody asked for, warm and slightly pleased with herself. You'll get over it. You always do. You always do. She wasn't wrong, and that was the worst part of the whole call. I had always gotten over it before, right on schedule, like a subscription I'd never once thought to cancel. That night, after Ren was finally asleep, I opened Find My on my phone out of some instinct I couldn't fully name. The little grinned, for her MacBook glowed steady on the map. At Todd's house. For miles from my parents, exactly where you'd expect a laptop meant for Cole to end up, since Cole lived there. Everything about the dot's location looked precisely the way the story said it should look. So I closed the app and felt nothing but tired. I want to explain something here, because I know exactly what some of you watching this are already thinking. Yes, I could have called the police that same night. It was a $1,600 machine taken directly out of a child's hands, and I had the receipt sitting in a kitchen drawer to prove every dollar of it. But walk it forward with me the way I had to. I file a report against my own mother. Officers show up at her door. And for the rest of her childhood, my daughter is the girl whose grandmother got a police visit over her, because that is precisely how my mother would tell that story to anyone who'd listen, and my mother's version is the one this family has always run on. The cost of that particular truth would land, in the end, on Ren. It always does. It lands on the child every single time, and I wasn't willing to let that happen just so I could feel like I'd done something immediately. So, I didn't call anyone. I also didn't go online and buy a replacement that night, and I need you to understand exactly why, because it's the decision everything else in this story pivots on. My mother's text had already made the family's expectation completely clear. Buying Ren a brand new laptop by Tuesday morning would have cost me an afternoon and around $1,100. It also would have quietly taught my daughter that when someone takes what belongs to you, the correct response is for your mother to pay for the damage without complaint so everyone else can move on comfortably. I had spent 20 years being exactly that person, the one who pays so the room can move on. Not with her half of that machine. Not this time. Friday came, the 13th, and for the first time in 14 straight weeks, Ren writes at midnight did not post. 8 o'clock arrived and passed on the kitchen clock. I stood in the doorway of her room and watched her sitting cross-legged on her bed with a spiral notebook open in her lap, writing chapter 15 out by hand in purple gel ink, slow and stubborn, the pen dragging a little on the harder consonants. You could use my laptop, I offered. Just to post tonight. She didn't look up from the page. Not until it's mine again. I sat down on the end of the bed anyway, the way I used to before all of this started, and asked her to read me what she had so far. She hesitated, then read me 2 paragraphs about the girl who talks to lighthouses, learning that the tallest one on her coastline had gone dark years ago, not because anyone broke it, but because everyone assumed somebody else was already tending it. I didn't say anything about how close that sat to our own, actual week. I don't think she meant it that way yet, not consciously. She was 12, writing about lighthouses, not about her grandmother. But I've read enough of her chapters since to know my daughter's instincts get to the truth of a thing a solid month before the rest of her catches up to what she's already written. Down in the comment section of chapter 14, a reader had written, "Where's CH15? Are you okay, Ren?" She read that comment, by my count, somewhere around 10 separate times over the course of that evening, thumb hovering over the reply button and never once pressing it. Other comments piled up underneath it over the following days, gentler ones, someone hoping she was just busy with school, someone else saying they'd wait as long as it took, no pressure, take care of yourself first. Ren read every single one of those too, and answered none of them, and I understood, watching her do it, that she was protecting something in that silence, just as deliberately as she'd protected the laptop's dent with a sticker. My 12-year-old had 3,000 strangers waiting on her, and she had decided, entirely on her own, that she would rather go silent for the first time in over a year than type her own story onto borrowed ground. I recognized that particular strain of stubbornness immediately. I just genuinely couldn't tell you anymore whether she'd inherited it from me, or whether I was about to learn it from her instead. But here's what actually frightened me that week more than one missed Friday post. It was the thing she quietly stopped doing entirely. 12-year-olds campaign. They negotiate. They circle back to a grievance 3 separate times over a weekend and wear you down about sleepovers and phone privileges with the patient persistence of small, extremely committed lawyers. After that first Monday, my daughter never once asked me about the laptop again. Not when we'd get it back. Not whether her grandmother felt bad. Not anything at all. She had already sorted the whole event into the pile of things that happen to you and simply don't get fixed, and she was quietly rearranging her own expectations around the loss the way you rearrange furniture around a piece that's never coming back. That silence told me exactly how deep the lesson had already sunk in by the end of that first week, and it was the moment I understood that waiting too long to act would end up costing far more than the machine itself ever had. The school project, at least, I could fix quietly, and without anyone else needing to know. Her family history interview lived safely up in the cloud backup along with everything else on that machine, so I pulled the video file down onto my own work laptop one evening, and she turned the assignment in on time. She got an A, with a note from her teacher paperclipped to the rubric saying it was one of the most genuine interviews she'd seen in 11 years of assigning that same project. Ren read the note twice, and then folded it into her notebook instead of showing it to anyone at that table who might have asked to see it. She looked at the grade the way you look at a photograph from a vacation somebody else got to take. My father never called that week. My father doesn't call, hasn't in all the years I've known him as an adult. But on Wednesday, I came home from work and found a basket of tomatoes sitting square in the middle of our front doormat, still faintly warm from the afternoon sun. No note. There's never a note with my father. In the 40 years I've known him, I don't think I've ever once heard the actual word sorry leave his mouth. He grows it instead, and hands it to you in a basket and lets you decide for yourself what it's supposed to mean. I stood on my own porch holding tomatoes from a man who had watched his granddaughter's face close like a door at his own dinner table and said absolutely nothing in the moment it happened. And I honestly didn't know yet whether those tomatoes were an apology or simply a down payment on one. I put them on the kitchen counter. I went to bed. If your own family has ever quietly told you what you were allowed to be hurt by and for how long, stay with me because 9 days after that dinner, everything changed at once. I didn't have a plan. I want that on the record before I tell you what happened next. I wasn't sitting in the dark somewhere plotting anything elaborate. I was simply doing what I had always done, absorbing, adjusting, getting through one more week. Then my own job handed me a plan I never went looking for. Tuesday, March the 17th, 10:40 in the morning. I know the exact time because it's stamped directly on the screenshot, and I have looked at that screenshot more times since than I could ever count for you honestly. Part of my regular morning routine at GearSwap is a market sweep. I search every local listing platform inside a 25-mile radius, so our trade-in prices stay honest against what things are actually selling for out in the world. That morning I typed the same search I typed 1,000 mornings before it, and I scrolled, and the fourth thumbnail down the page stopped my hand flat on the mouse. A 15-inch MacBook Air. $950. For miles away. Seller, T. Marsh. For a second sitting there I told myself it was nothing. T. Marsh could be anyone. My own father's name would technically fit those same 2 letters, and half of Ohio seems to share a last name once you start actually looking for it on a screen. I have built 6 years of professional credibility on not jumping to conclusions off a thumbnail, and some old, careful part of my brain tried to apply that same rule to my own family before I'd even opened the listing all the way. Deb was passing behind my chair with a clipboard at exactly that moment, and she glanced at the screen the way she prices absolutely everything, in about half a second flat. Overpriced, she said. Tell him market's 900, tops. And she kept walking, because to her it was just another Tuesday listing, one more overpriced laptop among 100 others that week. I clicked it open. The first photograph had been taken sitting on a kitchen counter, beige faux stone, with a distinctive teardrop-shaped burn scar near the right edge where somebody had once set a pan down without a trivet under it. I remembered the exact Thanksgiving that scar happened, for years back, Todd pulling a turkey pan straight from the oven and setting it down too fast while everyone was distracted arguing about whether the stuffing needed more sage, then laughing it off in front of the whole table even though he'd just had that counter installed that same summer. I have washed dishes next to that exact burn scar every single Thanksgiving for a decade. It's Todd's kitchen counter. I would know it the way you know a relative's laugh through a closed door. The description read, like new, barely used. Selling for my son. Cash only. Can meet today. Selling for my son. 9 days. It had been exactly 9 days since my mother stood at her own dining table and traded her granddaughter's laptop for the pleasure of announcing Cole's future to a room full of relatives. 9 days since he'll actually do something with his life. And here was Cole's supposed future, photographed on Todd's kitchen counter, priced to move as fast as somebody could find cash for it. I sat very still at my desk. I'm told afterward that I looked completely normal the whole time, that I even rang up a customer's trade-in phone somewhere in the middle of it without a single visible hitch in my voice. Inside, something enormous was quietly rearranging itself into a new shape. But I want you to notice right here what I did not yet actually know for certain. A silver MacBook Air looks like every other silver MacBook Air ever manufactured. Being 90% sure isn't the same thing as being sure, and in my line of work, 90% is just another word for wrong dressed up to look confident. That night, I made a decision. I second-guessed the entire drive home. Twice I actually reached for my phone at a red light, ready to text Deb and ask her opinion first, and twice I put it back down, because I already knew what I actually thought and didn't need anyone else's permission to trust my own judgment on something this close to home. I showed Ren the listing photos. I thought seriously about protecting her from it a little longer. Then I decided she had already been protected out of the truth enough times in one single month to last her a while. Besides, the machine was half hers by every measure that mattered. Co-owners get told things, even the hard ones. She swiped through the photos slowly, saying nothing at all, and on the third one, she stopped cold. She spread 2 fingers on the screen and zoomed into the left corner of the lid. There it was, small, curved, unmistakable. A crescent moon pressed into the aluminum. "That's my dent, Mom." Her voice came out very quiet and very steady. And then it wasn't quite steady anymore, and I pulled her against my shoulder while it all came apart at once. I looked where she'd been looking. Next to the dent sat a faint ghost on the metal, a sticker-shaped shadow of adhesive residue, roughly the outline of a smiling axolotl, scraped away in a hurry by somebody who thought he was erasing evidence and had instead just finished creating some. Her dent. Her sticker's ghost. Her half of a laptop for sale, for miles away, on her uncle's kitchen counter. I put Ren to bed that night longer than usual, sitting on the edge of her mattress until her breathing evened out, the way I used to when she was small enough to still need that kind of watching over. Then I sat alone at my own kitchen table and typed a message to my brother. I'm not going to pretend to you that I didn't. It was long, and it was vicious in places I don't usually let myself go, and it used 2 words I don't use in front of my daughter. My thumb hovered over send for a solid minute. Then I held down delete instead and watched the whole thing eat itself from right to left until the box sat empty again. Because here's exactly what sending it would have bought me. Todd deletes the listing inside of 5 minutes. By morning, the story is already written and circulating. He was upgrading it for Cole, trading it in for something better, and I'm the hysterical one, the dramatic one, stalking my own brother's marketplace account for no reason anyone can explain. The laptop disappears into cash. The cash disappears into Todd. And my mother tells the whole extended family that I attacked my own brother over some kind of misunderstanding. I had already watched this exact family launder worse than that over the years. A story like that doesn't die just because you argue with it out loud. You don't argue with the story. You quietly buy it back. There was exactly one way to bring that laptop home without asking a single person's permission, without tipping anyone off in advance, and without breaking one rule I could later be made to answer for. Pay the man his asking price. Or close enough to it that it looked completely ordinary. I scrolled my contacts and stopped on Deb's name. She answered on the second ring. I told her the whole thing start to finish, and there was a pause on the other end of the line longer than I expected from her. Then she asked the only question she apparently considered relevant. Cash or trouble? Cash, I said. She sighed, and she sounded genuinely disappointed in the answer. Like, I'd picked the boring option on purpose. Deb and I have worked the same counter for 4 years now, and in all that time I've learned exactly 2 things about her that matter here. The first is that she once talked a man out of an entire storage unit's worth of stolen inventory just by asking him 3 quiet questions about the serial numbers in a voice so calm he apparently confessed before she'd finished the third one. The second is that she raised 2 boys alone after her own husband walked out on a Tuesday and never once came back for so much as a phone call, which is probably the real reason she didn't ask me a single follow-up question that night beyond cash or trouble. She already knew, better than almost anyone else I could have called, exactly what it costs to fix something quietly instead of loudly, and exactly why a person sometimes has to. By Thursday, a marketplace profile called Pam, 6 years old, entirely full of garden furniture listings belonging to Deb, had messaged Todd about the MacBook. She offered $875. He countered at $925. They landed on $900 because Deb has never once in her life paid full asking price for anything and wasn't about to start for my brother's benefit. He replied in 11 minutes flat. She told me at work the next morning, showing me the thread on her phone. His last message sat right there on the screen.
Can do Saturday.
Need it gone. Need it gone. 3 words doing a tremendous amount of quiet confessing all on their own. Saturday, March the 21st, a grocery store parking lot on the east side. Late morning, sun out, carts rattling across the asphalt somewhere nearby. I parked across the lot in the far row, engine off, and watched my own brother sell his son's future to a total stranger for what amounted to truck money. He was cheerful the whole time. That's the detail I still can't quite let go of. He shook Deb's hand. He made small talk with her like they were old neighbors. I sat there with both hands still on my own steering wheel, engine off, watching my brother laugh at something Deb said, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel at all in that moment, which was a strange, hollow kind of pity underneath the anger. Not enough to stop what I was doing.
Not even close to enough for that.
But enough to notice that a man who could sell his own son's laptop this easily, this cheerfully, in a public parking lot on a Saturday morning, had probably sold plenty of other things just as easily long before this one, and probably to people who loved him a great deal more than a 15-year-old with a cracked Chromebook currently did. And standing right there in the open air, completely unprompted, he told her, "My son outgrew it. Kid's a genius, always upgrading." Deb repeated it back to me word for word that same afternoon, and I'd later see he'd written nearly the same exact sentence into the listing itself. His son had held that machine for one single evening. I didn't know that part yet. What I knew, watching through my own windshield, was Todd counting the bills twice, licking his thumb between them under a bright March sky, then clapping Deb on the shoulder and saying, "God bless," before walking back to his truck. The entire transaction took 4 minutes. That night, at my own kitchen table, I took the original box down from the top shelf of the hall closet and set it beside the laptop, and I read the serial number printed on the box, and then I read it off the machine itself, letter for letter, number for number. A perfect match. Todd had erased it, of course, wiped the whole thing back to a factory setup screen, scrubbed Ren's name out of the software the same way he'd scraped her sticker off the lid. But there's a thing about these machines that people like my brother never seem to learn until it's already far too late for the lesson to help them. You can erase every file on a laptop. You cannot erase who the machine still thinks it belongs to. The setup screen glowed patiently and asked its one simple, unbothered question. The password for the account this machine belongs to. I typed it, and the laptop unlocked like a door recognizing a key it had been waiting on the whole time. They had erased her name off the screen. The machine still asked for her password anyway, because machines remember their owners, and as it turned out, every file that owner had ever trusted them with. Chapter 15. The Family History Interview. Question 4. My father laughing about grease and pennies, alive and intact and glowing right back up out of the dark the second the screen came on. All of it came flooding back down from the cloud backup I'd switched on in a parking lot in August out of pure boring habit. 60 seconds of setup, 7 months earlier, with absolutely no idea what it would end up saving. There was one more person who needed to know that same night. The smallest shareholder in the whole arrangement. I woke Ren up because some things genuinely shouldn't wait until morning. I brought her into the kitchen and she saw it sitting there on the table. The dent, the pale ghost where her axolotl used to be, and she pressed both hands flat over her own mouth. Then she did something that told me exactly whose daughter she really is. She didn't ask if she could use it. She asked what the plan was. I told her the truth. The plan was patience. The laptop would sleep in the locked drawer of my office desk, right next to the receipt, until the exact right moment arrived, and until then, absolutely nobody could know it was home. Ren looked at the machine, then at me. So, we know something Grandma doesn't. For now. She nodded slowly, like she was signing something binding. 12 years old, and she understood the assignment better than most adults twice her age ever would have. 2 days later, my mother scheduled a family dinner to celebrate, of all possible things, Cole's education. Here's a strange thing for me to admit to you now. The 5 weeks that followed turned out to be some of the calmest of my entire adult life, and every single one of them took place inside a lie I was letting my own mother believe. She called them peace dinners. She never once used the word apology, because in her own mind there was nothing whatsoever to apologize for. There was only my mood, which needed managing, the way you'd patiently wait out a stretch of bad weather you had no control over anyway. So the invitations kept coming. Sunday dinner, 6 o'clock, bring Ren. And I went, because going was part of the plan, even though I didn't fully understand the shape of the plan myself yet. I only understood this much. The longer my family believed their own story was working, the more of it they would say out loud in front of witnesses, and every single word they said out loud was one I could later hold them to. Ren asked to skip the first one. I let her. Some rooms a child shouldn't have to sit inside twice in 1 month. So it was 5 of us at the table on March the 29th when my mother stood up, lifted her wine glass, and gave the toast that would eventually take her whole story apart, piece by piece, without her having the faintest idea that was what she was doing. She looked radiant that night. She looked like a woman holding a winning hand she'd never once had to bluff with. Cole uses that laptop every single day for school, she announced. That's what family sacrifice looks like. The table murmured its agreement. Todd raised his glass along with everyone else. My father studied the tablecloth with real intensity, and I sat there with my water glass and my calm face, thinking, the laptop you are toasting right now is sitting in my locked office drawer 11 miles from this table. It has been there for 8 days already. You are, at this exact moment, toasting a drawer. I want to be honest with you about what that felt like, because it wasn't noble in the slightest. It felt like warmth spreading through my chest. Not joy exactly. Something more careful and deliberate than joy. For 20 years, my family had known everything about me they'd ever decided was convenient to know, and I had known only what they chose to hand me. Now, for the first time in my life, the current was finally running the other direction.
Every single day, she said that night.
She would go on to say some version of that exact sentence at least 6 more times across those 5 weeks, to me, to cousins on the phone, to the neighbor leaning over the back fence. She was laying it down like fresh pavement, one confident sentence at a time. I just let her pour. I got to hear that pavement being laid up close once in the middle of April. I'd stopped by to return one of my father's casserole dishes, and my mother was in the kitchen on the phone with a cousin, her back to the doorway, and I stood there holding a Pyrex dish and listened to her tell the laptop story to somebody entirely new. Except by now it had grown in the telling. In this version, Cole was top of his whole class. In this version, his teachers had never seen a student quite like him before. In this version, she had always known exactly which grandchild had it in them. And then she caught herself mid-sentence and laughed and corrected it to in him, and kept right on going without missing another beat. The story was quietly improving itself the way stories always do when nobody's ever around to check them against anything real. I set the dish down on the counter, waved, and left without saying a word, and sat in my car afterward for a full minute with both hands on the wheel. Every single embellishment was another paving stone laid down by her own hand. She was building the road to that eventual room herself, one exaggeration at a time, and she was so genuinely proud of how smooth it was turning out. Driving home that afternoon, I let myself ask for the first time in weeks whether I was actually doing the right thing by letting her keep talking. There's a version of patience that starts to look, from the outside, an awful lot like cowardice, and I sat at a red light on the way back to my own house, genuinely unable to tell which one I was practicing. I decided, by the time the light turned green, that the difference was simple enough once I actually looked at it straight on. Cowardice hopes the problem quietly disappears on its own. What I was doing was collecting the problem, one sentence at a time, until it could no longer be argued away by anyone in that family, including her. Cole had been sitting at that same March 29th dinner when his grandmother first said every single day out loud. He looked down hard at his mashed potatoes and his ears went bright red, and he didn't say one word the entire rest of the meal. I noticed it. I filed it away. I didn't yet understand what it actually meant. Ren came to the second peace dinner in the second week of April because I decided she needed to see with her own eyes that nothing had actually changed, rather than simply take my word for it. My mother hugged her at the door, told her she'd missed her, and then spent the entire meal asking Cole about robotics camp registration in a voice pitched deliberately loud enough to carry down the table. Ren ate her pot roast in near total silence and didn't say a single word about the laptop, and neither did anyone else, and on the drive home she asked me, very quietly, "Does she know I can hear her?" I told her the truth. I didn't think my mother had ever once considered whether Ren could hear her. That, more than anything else that whole spring, is probably the sentence that finally convinced me an apology from that particular room was never actually coming on its own. At home, the Fridays kept coming and going. One night, tucking her in, I asked Ren, carefully, how she actually felt about her grandmother these days, since we didn't talk about it much, and I didn't want my own silence to look like I'd already decided the answer for her. She thought about it with the particular seriousness she brings to homework problems that don't have one obvious right answer. "I don't hate her," she said finally. "I just don't believe her anymore. I don't think those are the same thing." I told her I thought that was about the most accurate way I'd heard anyone describe it all spring, including myself. Ren filled one spiral notebook completely and started a second, all of it still in purple gel ink by choice. There's a callus now on the middle finger of her right hand, small and hard, a genuine writer's bump, and she's oddly proud of it. Shows it off the way other kids show off a scraped knee from something brave. One night I offered again. "Just post it tonight, sweetheart. Use my laptop. Your readers miss you." She looked up from the notebook with the patience of someone explaining something slow to a grown adult who really should already know better. "Chapter 15 is the best one I've ever written, Mom. It deserves the right keyboard." I stopped offering after that conversation. Some decisions, once a 12-year-old makes them out loud like that, you simply respect. Meanwhile, for miles from my parents' house, my brother's truck grew jewelry. I noticed it in early April, parked at the curb outside my parents' place. Brand new chrome rims, Mirror bright, the single shiniest thing on an otherwise 10-year-old pickup that badly needed a new transmission more than it needed rims. Aftermarket, probably $800 give or take a little. I didn't need a calculator to do that math. I had personally watched $900 get counted twice in a parking lot 3 weeks earlier. Now I was simply looking at exactly where a good chunk of it had gone. Todd caught me looking and patted the fender like it was a horse that had done well at the track. Treated myself. Been a good month. Transmission still slipping on the highway? I asked, mostly just to see what he'd say. Nah, she's fine. Little rough on the upshift, that's all. He said it the easy, dismissive way he says most things that are actually a genuine problem, and I filed that away too, another small tell in a season that was quickly turning into nothing but tells. A good month. His own son was still doing his homework on a spiderweb screen, and somehow, according to Todd, it had been a good month regardless. It was the dinner conversation that same evening, though, that changed the entire size of what I was looking at. My mother, glowing, passing the green beans around the table, mentioned as a boast, the exact way other grandmothers mention a report card, that she'd just written Todd a check for Cole's spring robotics camp. $600, she said. But you truly can't put a price on that boy's future. I kept my fork moving steadily and said nothing at all. Here's what my mother didn't know about my supposedly boring job. Gear Swap runs an electronics recycling drive every spring in partnership with the county community center, the same community center that happens to run the county's actual youth robotics camp. I've seen the camp's flyer taped up in that lobby more times than I could ever count for you. The camp costs $180 and registration had closed back in January. $600 for a $180 camp that had been completely full for 2 solid months already. I sat at my mother's table doing quiet subtraction behind a face I kept perfectly still, and the number I kept arriving at, over and over, was $420 of pure, unexplained air. One overpriced camp, on its own, could have been an honest mix-up, Todd rounding generously upward, skimming a little difference off the top for himself. Ugly, but small enough to let go of. Except my mother said one more thing that same evening, mentioned it the same offhand way you'd mention the weather turning. She said the camp money was on top of the academy. Of course. The academy. I'd been hearing about the academy for close to 2 years without ever really, truly listening to a single word of it. Cole's coding, the reason he was supposedly going somewhere important in life, the proof endlessly cited at every single family gathering that Todd was finally, at long last, being a real father to somebody. It had always washed straight over me as background noise, ordinary family wallpaper I'd stopped registering years ago. I drove home that night doing an entirely different kind of math than usual. The laptop, I understood now with total clarity, had only ever been a symptom. I was about to go looking on my own time for the actual disease underneath it. I want to be completely clear with you about how I looked into all of this because it genuinely matters. I didn't hack into anything. I didn't log into a single account that wasn't mine. I didn't call in a favor from anyone I'd feel uncomfortable explaining later. I didn't do one single thing you couldn't do tonight, right now, from your own couch with your own phone. Every piece of what I found was sitting out in plain sight the entire time. It had simply been sitting quietly behind a story nobody had ever bothered to check against it. I started with the academy itself. 2 full years of hearing about it, and I realized driving toward it that I had never once actually heard its full proper name until that dinner, when my mother said it with a little verbal flourish. The Alden Coding Academy. My mother pronounced it the exact way people pronounce the names of private schools they can't quite afford, but want you to think they can. Alden Avenue sits 9 minutes from my office. I drove past it on my lunch break the very next day. Number 240 Alden is a short strip of storefronts, a nail salon, a check cashing place, and, wedged between them, a single unit with butcher paper taped up over the front glass and a leasing sign in the window, with one peeling corner curling in the wind. There was a takeout menu for the nail salon wedged under that unit's own front door, sun-bleached down to almost pure white. Nothing about that particular doorway had been opened by anyone in a very long time. I sat in my car outside it for a few minutes longer than I needed to, engine running, staring at butcher paper the color of an old grocery bag. I actually got out at one point and cupped my hands against the glass where the paper had come loose at one corner, half expecting to find at least a folding table and a whiteboard inside, some threadbare attempt at a real business Todd could point to if pressed. There was nothing. Bare concrete floor, a dead light fixture hanging from the ceiling, a single abandoned shopping cart someone had wheeled in from the lot next door and left there to rust. 2 years of tutoring invoices, and the actual physical address behind all of it held less furniture than my own garage. That same night, I looked up the Academy's website, the one my mother swore Todd had personally shown her on his phone at some point. It loaded a single gray page with one sentence sitting on it, centered, alone. This domain is parked free courtesy of the registrar. A parked domain. Do you know what that actually means if you've never had a reason to look into it? It means somebody bought a web address which costs roughly $12 a year and never built one single thing behind it. It's the internet's exact equivalent of a business card with no business attached to it whatsoever. $12 buys you the name. And the name was apparently all my brother ever needed, because the only customer who was ever going to check on it was his own mother, and she doesn't check. The next morning, I made one phone call, and I made it the honest way. GearSwap already works with that same community center on our spring recycling drive, so I know the front desk staff by name. I asked about the robotics camp, told them a customer with a kid had asked me about it, which had actually happened 2 full springs earlier, so it wasn't even really a lie, and the woman on the desk, Denise, answered without a single pause. 180, Han, and we've been full since January. Waitlist's closed too. What about a private version? I asked, keeping my voice as casual as I could manage. One-on-one coaching, something outside the regular program? Denise laughed, not unkindly. Honey, this is a county community center. We run bingo, out of that same room on Thursdays. There's no private anything happening here. I thanked her and hung up, and stood there a moment in the lobby with my phone still in my hand, because that one extra question had just closed off the last honest explanation I could have offered Todd on his behalf. I wrote it down on a yellow sticky note right there in the lobby. 180. Full since January. No private option. I underlined it twice, and then I sat in my car in the parking lot looking at my own handwriting, and I felt the ground shift a few careful degrees under my entire family, because this wasn't one padded check anymore. Now there was a pattern with 2 separate data points, a fake storefront, a $12 website, and 2 full years of dinner table mythology built on top of all of it. What I still didn't have was the actual size of the thing. How long it had been running. How much money in total. How deep the story actually went underneath the surface I could already see. There was exactly one person who could tell me almost everything at once, and he was 14 years old. I want you to know, I genuinely thought about it. I'm not going to pretend to you that I didn't. Cole trusted me more than he trusted most of the adults in that family put together, and a few gentle, careful questions on the right kind of afternoon would very likely have handed me the entire map at once. And every single time I ran that scene forward in my head, I heard exactly how it would end. With me using a 14-year-old child to win a war between adults, which is precisely the crime I was already trying to answer for on my daughter's behalf. My mother had already turned one grandchild into a trophy and the other into a casualty. I was not about to turn either one of them into an informant on top of that. So I drew the line right there and left it drawn. The adults had built this entire thing. The adults were going to be the ones who answered for it. If the truth wanted to reach me on its own, it would have to find its own way there without my help. And then, for about 2 full days, I very nearly put the whole thing down for good. I stood in my kitchen one night with that yellow sticky note in my hand and made the exact argument any exhausted person would make in my position. It's her money. She's 68 years old, and she can set fire to her own checkbook if that's what genuinely makes her happy. It isn't my account. It isn't my loss. It isn't my job to fix. I have my daughter back. I have the laptop locked safely in a drawer. I have the receipt. Take the win that's already sitting in my hand and close the whole drawer on the rest of it. Those 2 days, I went to work, made dinner, helped Ren with her math homework, and told absolutely nobody, including Deb, that I was even considering stopping. I remember standing at my own counter on the second evening, sorting a stack of trade-in phones nobody had picked up yet, thinking that some of their owners had probably made this exact same calculation about some smaller unfairness in their own lives at some point, and quietly let it go, and I wondered how many of them regretted it years later in a kitchen just like mine. I got as far as actually dropping that sticky note into the junk drawer. My hand was still resting on the drawer pull when the counter-argument arrived anyway, quiet and completely finished, like it had been waiting patiently for me to stop talking. It was never really about her money. It's about the machine her money keeps feeding. The same machine that decided one grandchild was an investment worth protecting and the other was a rounding error worth nothing at all. The same machine that priced my daughter at $0 in front of 6 people at her own family's dinner table. Those checks were never a private hobby of my mother's. They were the fuel line running the whole engine. And a machine like that doesn't ever stop at just one laptop. It escalates, every time, because it has never once in its life been told no. I took the sticky note back out of the junk drawer. 2 days after that, my mother's Easter card arrived in the mail. Pastel tulips printed across the front, her looping cursive filling the inside. Sunday, 1 o'clock, everyone. That means everyone, Mara. The word everyone was underlined hard enough to visibly dent the card stock underneath it. I asked Ren if she wanted to come this time, and I made sure she understood it was genuinely her choice and not an obligation dressed up as one. She thought about it longer than I expected, turning her pen over in her fingers, and finally said she wanted to see the egg hunt because her younger cousins would be disappointed if she wasn't there to help, which struck me as a very Ren kind of reason, showing up for the small people at that table rather than for the big ones who'd stopped earning it. I went to Easter for the ham. I left with something I never once asked for. Easter Sunday, April the 5th, was warm for Ohio that early in the year, and my parents' backyard was completely full by the time we arrived. Little cousins swarming the grass hunting for plastic eggs, aunts already finding the lawn chairs, my mother orbiting the whole gathering with a serving tray, directing everyone's joy the way other people direct traffic. Someone had strung last year's Easter banner between two porch posts, slightly faded from a summer in the garage, and nobody had bothered taking it down since. My father stood near the grill doing more listening than talking, same as always, occasionally passing someone a paper plate without being asked. Ren stationed herself at the picnic table with the youngest cousins and helped a 4-year-old count her eggs one at a time, patient in a way that told you exactly where the babysitting money had actually come from. My daughter has always been good with little kids. It's the sitter in her, and I've come to think it's also just who she is underneath everything else, the one who notices who's been left out of the counting and quietly fixes it herself, without waiting to be asked. Cole sat alone on the back steps, 14 years old with his 15th birthday still 3 weeks off, 6 feet tall now in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, hunched over the same cracked Chromebook from March. The spiderweb pattern across its screen caught the afternoon sun at an angle that made it look almost decorative from a distance, if you didn't know what you were actually looking at. The golden child grandson with the guaranteed future, doing his homework on shattered glass 30 feet away from the woman who genuinely believed she'd bought him a MacBook he used every single day. Todd was somewhere around the side of the house with a beer, holding court with 2 other husbands about something involving a fantasy football league, entirely uninterested, as far as I could tell, in whether his own son had anyone to sit with. I got a lemonade and sat down on the step beside him, not close, and distance. That screen's got more cracks in it than my driveway, I said. He huffed, almost a real laugh. Then he glanced around the yard the careful way kids check before they say something they've been sitting on, and he said something I hadn't asked for, and honestly never would have.
Aunt Mara.
Tell Ren I didn't ask for it. His thumb worried at the broken corner of the Chromebook while he talked. Dad took it back the next day anyway. Said he had to install stuff on it. I kept my face very still. The same one I use at the trade-in counter when a number doesn't match a story. The next day, Cole had held my daughter's laptop for exactly 1 evening. And then it had gone straight to Todd's kitchen counter, and from there straight to $950, and for 5 entire weeks now, my mother had been raising a glass to a boy who didn't have it, and a machine that had been sitting the whole time in my locked drawer. I allowed myself exactly one question. I picked the most harmless version of it I had available. How's the coding academy going? Cole blinked at me. What academy? 2 words. There are demolitions that take an entire truckload of dynamite, and there are demolitions that take exactly 2 words from a 15-year-old sitting on a back step. I promise you, the second kind is louder every time. He must have seen something shift in my face, because his ears went the same bright red they'd gone at that March dinner, and he looked out at the yard, at the little kids still hunting eggs in the grass, and the rest of it came out of him low and fast, like it had been under real pressure for a long time already. Grandma thinks I'm some kind of genius. I'm a C student at Mara. His jaw worked once. Dad tells her stuff. He's always told her stuff. I figured the robotics money was probably for the truck. He shrugged with one shoulder, a kid trying very hard to make a confession sound casual and mostly failing at it. I don't know. I never really know. I just know I'm not what she says I am. I looked at my nephew, and for the first time in this entire ugly season, I actually saw him clearly. The golden child was not a co-conspirator in any of this. He was a hostage. His own father had built an entire boy out of convenient lies and made the real one live quietly in that boy's shadow. And the real one had known, vaguely and miserably, for years, and had carried the whole weight of it alone, because who exactly was he supposed to tell? The grandmother whose favorite story in the world he happened to be the main character of? He was collateral on a loan he'd never once signed for himself. Whatever I decided to do next, I told myself right there on that step, none of it was going to land on him.
Cole.
Look at me. He did, barely, I still mostly on the grass. You don't owe anybody a story. C students build half of this country. He laughed at that, and it cracked a little in the middle, but it was real, the first genuinely real thing I'd heard out of anyone at a family gathering in a solid month. Then a shadow fell across the steps. My mother had been watching the 2 of us through the kitchen window. I have no idea for how long. She came outside with her tray, and her hostess smile fully assembled, and she did exactly what she always does in front of an audience. She performed. She swept one arm around Cole's shoulders and turned him bodily toward a cluster of ants standing near the coffee urn. This one, she announced, uses his laptop every single day for school. Tell them, sweetheart. I watched my nephew's shoulders go rigid under her arm. I watched his eyes drop straight down to the cracked screen still sitting in his own lap. I watched him not answer a single word, and I watched her not notice at all, because my mother has never once in her life needed a witness to actually agree with her out loud. She only ever needs them present. 3 layers deep now, standing in that backyard. She didn't know where the laptop actually was. She didn't know what Cole had just told me, 10 feet away from her own kitchen window. And she certainly didn't know that I now knew every single piece of it. All at once, on the same warm afternoon, she'd chosen to hand out plastic eggs. I stood in my parents' backyard on Easter Sunday holding a half-melted lemonade, carrying more truth in my chest than everyone else at that party combined, and the weight of it was almost physical, something I could feel pressing against my sternum, the way you feel the first sign of a headache building behind your eyes. But truth without a number attached to it is just a grievance you can't prove. I had the storefront. I had the park domain. I had the $180 camp. I had a 15-year-old's 2-word demolition, delivered on a back step in front of nobody but me. What I still needed was the total, how much, over how long, and that particular number lived in exactly one place in this entire family. A checkbook that had never once belonged to me. Before I tell you what my own father did next, drop your guess in the comments. After 46 years of near-total silence, whose side do you honestly think he finally chose? He came on a Tuesday, April the 7th, 2 days after Easter, late in the afternoon. I heard the truck pull into my driveway and found my father standing on my porch holding a coffee can with a cracked plastic lid. "Brandywine tomatoes," he said, handing it over. Seed packets rattled loose inside when I took it from him. "Plant them after the last frost, not before." He just stood there afterward. My father is not a man who stands there. He delivers something and departs, same as always. I stepped back to let him in, and he came into my kitchen and sat down at the table, and he turned that coffee can in a slow, silent circle 3 full times before he finally spoke to it instead of to me. "That's not why I'm here." From the inside pocket of his jacket, he took out a small book, soft and swollen at the spine from being opened and closed too many times over too many years. His check register. 46 years of marriage, and every single month of it, my father has sat under that same kitchen light and balanced that register in his own tight, square, machinist's handwriting, saying almost nothing out loud while he does it. My mother writes the checks. My father records them. That's the entire division of power in their marriage, as far as I'd ever understood it growing up in that house. And I had spent my whole life assuming it made him nothing more than a bookkeeper. It made him a witness instead. It had been making him a witness for a very long time. He opened the register flat on my kitchen table and slid it across to me, turning pages with a thumbnail, each entry flagged with a small pencil tick he must have added afterward on his own, sitting alone at that same table long after everyone else had gone to bed. Coal tutoring, $250. Coal coding, $200. The 200s marched steadily down the columns, month after month, patient as rent coming due. Coal camp, $600. Going back through all of 2025. Back through 2024. Spring, summer, fall, winter, and spring again. And in the margin of the very last page, written in pencil and pressed over twice, so it couldn't possibly be mistaken for anything else, one number sat by itself. $6,800. 2 years. $6,800 for classes that had never once existed, at an academy with butcher paper taped over its own front windows, for a boy who genuinely believed the money had been going toward his father's new truck rims the entire time. I asked my father, carefully, whether he thought Todd had always been like this, even as a boy. He considered the question a long time before answering, the way he considers most things. "Your brother used to bring me broken radios to fix when he was small, maybe 8 or 9, he said. Never once wanted to learn how they worked. Just wanted to be the one who handed his mother a working radio at the end of it." He shook his head slowly. I should have taught him the fixing part instead of just fixing it for him. Might have made a difference. Might not have. I'll never know now, and that's on me as much as it's on him. I asked him the only question I had left in me. How long had he known?
He was quiet for a while.
My father's silences have textures to them, and I have known most of them my whole life, but this particular one was heavier than any I'd ever sat inside with him before. "Suspected the coding a year ago," he said finally. "The camp made it certain." His thumb moved slowly over the register's worn cover. "Told myself it was her money. Her business." He looked up at me, and my father's eyes were wet, and I have seen that happen to him exactly twice in my whole life. Once at his own brother's funeral, and once at my kitchen table on April the 7th. Then March happened. I watched her hand that laptop to that boy, and I watched her girl's face, and I went home, and I couldn't eat that whole night. I asked him, gently, why he'd never once said anything to her directly, in 46 years, about anything at all. He turned the register over once in his hands before he answered. "Your mother decided a long time ago what kind of family we were going to look like from the outside. I decided a long time ago I'd rather keep the peace than keep being right." He set the register flat again. "I'm not sure either one of us got the better end of that arrangement, if I'm honest with you now." We sat with that for a moment. The tomatoes he'd left on my porch 3 weeks earlier. The man who grows what he can't quite bring himself to say out loud. Then he did the thing that shaped everything that came after it. He put his big hand flat on top of the register, machinist's knuckles swollen now with age, and he laid out his terms, plain and level. "Don't burn her down, Mara." His voice didn't waver once. "She's my wife, and she's wrong, and I love her, and all 3 of those things are true at the exact same time.
Just stop the lying.
That's all I'm asking you for. He left the register sitting on my table when he finally stood to go. He drove home to her, and I sat alone in my kitchen taking a slow, careful inventory of everything I now held all at once. The laptop, physical in a locked drawer. The listing and my own brother's cheerful written words, digital, printed, undeniable. A boy's private truth, human, which I had already promised myself I would never once use as a weapon. And now a number, financial, in my own father's steady handwriting, with his blessing attached to exactly one condition. Don't burn her down.
Just stop the lying. I could work with that.
It clarified everything at once, actually, because it drew the exact same line I'd already drawn for myself on those back steps at Easter. No destruction. No police. No lawyers. No scorched earth left behind for anyone to pick through later. Just the truth, delivered whole, in a room it couldn't be talked back out of afterward. All I needed now was the room. As it turned out, I wasn't even going to have to build one myself. That night, my phone rang, and it was my mother, and her voice was sweet in a way that made every hair on my arm stand straight up before she'd even finished her first sentence. I was standing at the sink at the time, and I remember setting down the plate I was drying very carefully, the way you set something down when you already sense you're about to need both hands free. Do you remember, she began, not hello, straight into it, the summer you sold lemonade on the corner of Maple Street? You were 8. You wouldn't let a single soul help you carry that little table. That's how she opened. Not a greeting, a memory, warmed up and served to me, of myself being small and stubborn, and of her, watching approvingly from a safe distance. I remember, I said. You were always my independent one, she said, with a soft little laugh down the line meant for nobody but herself. Mara, sweetheart, this has gone on long enough, don't you think? A whole month, over a gadget. I waited. With my mother, the offer always follows the overture, same as it always has. Buy Ren a new laptop, she said. A nicer one, even. I'll chip in $100, and we'll be a family again. There it was. I want you to notice the actual shape of that offer because I certainly did, even standing right in the middle of hearing it.
Not I'm sorry.
Not I'll return it. The machine stays exactly where it is, gone for good. I absorb the full cost of replacing it. She contributes $100 against the $6,800 she'd already shoveled into Todd's fictions. And in exchange, the whole story gets to close out with everyone sitting back down in their assigned seats like nothing had ever moved. It wasn't an apology. It was a settlement offer, and a cheap one at that. And now I have to tell you the part of this I'm least proud of, because you deserve the whole truth from me, and because I suspect some of you watching this will recognize it immediately from the inside. I almost took it. I had a browser tab that had been sitting open on my phone for a full week already. A brand new MacBook Air, sitting in a shopping cart, $11.99, one click away from arriving at my door in 2 days. I built that cart at midnight after one of those earlier peace dinners, the exact way you hold a cigarette you've already decided you're not actually going to smoke. That same night, with my mother's voice still warm in my ear, I sat down at my own laptop after we'd hung up and looked at that waiting cart again. My cursor drifted up on its own and settled directly over the button. Place order. One click, $1,100 for peace. I had paid more than that for less my entire adult life. And the tired animal somewhere inside me, the one that had been fixing things and absorbing things and staying reasonable since long before Ren was even born, wanted that click so badly, it actually hurt behind my ribs. Not because it was right, because it was familiar. 20 years of conditioning doesn't just dissolve the moment you happen to find one incriminating listing online. It sits right there in the room with you afterward and whispers, very reasonably, that the old way really was easier. And the old way genuinely was easier. That's exactly what had made it the old way in the first place. Rationally, I knew everything I needed to know. The drawer 11 feet down the hall held the actual machine, whole and recovered. Emotionally, I was 8 years old again on the corner of Maple Street, wanting my mother to be proud of the lemonade stand one more time. I actually remember that afternoon, the real one, not just my mother's version of it. I remember the table was too heavy for me, and I dragged it the last 10 feet across the grass rather than ask for help, and I remember my mother watching from the porch with her arms crossed, not offering, waiting to see if I'd manage it alone. I did manage it, and she smiled, and told a neighbor later that week how independent I was. I was 8 years old, and I had already learned that the fastest way to earn her smile was to need absolutely nothing from her at all. 30 years later, at my own kitchen table with a shopping cart open in front of me, I understood for the first time that the lesson had never actually stopped teaching itself. I don't know how long I sat there like that. Long enough that the screen eventually dimmed on its own. Then a floorboard creaked behind me, and Ren was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, notebook hugged against her chest, the purple pen tucked behind one ear like a carpenter's pencil. She looked at me, then at the screen, and she read the entire scene in about 2 seconds flat, the way children always seem to know exactly when their parent is about to fold under pressure. I don't want a new one, Mom. No drama in her voice at all. She said it the plain way you'd correct someone's spelling. I want mine. The one with my dent in it. The one with my dent in it. Brand new means it belongs to a store. Dents mean it's yours. My own words, handed back to me 7 months later, with interest I hadn't expected to owe. I closed the laptop lid. In the dark kitchen, the click of it sounded exactly like the front door at my parents' house on March the 8th. Quiet and completely final. The next evening, I called my mother back and declined. One sentence. No speech attached to it.
No, Mom.
Ren doesn't need a new laptop. I didn't explain myself any further than that. Explaining is a door, and my mother is a draft that will find its way through any opening you leave her. There were 3 full seconds of silence on the line, and then I got to hear, for the very first time, the exact sound of a mask coming completely off. Then don't bother coming around here, she said, and hung up. The sweetness. The lemonade story. The $100. All of it, gone in 3 seconds flat, which told me with perfect precision exactly how much any of it had ever actually weighed in the first place. The softness had never once been a genuine change of heart. It had always been a tactic, and I had just watched it fail, for the very first time in its long and previously undefeated career. I set the phone down on my counter in the quiet kitchen and noted, with something close to clinical interest, that my hands weren't shaking at all. 3 days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Heavy cardstock, my mother's handwriting across the front. It was an invitation. Cole's 15th birthday party. Saturday, April the 25th. 1 o'clock, at my parents' house. Balloons printed along the border. And inside, beneath the time and address, one line added in her looping blue cursive. We'll put the laptop business behind us. Bring Ren. Family first. I read it standing right there at the mailbox, and I want to walk you through exactly what I saw in it, because it wasn't an invitation at all. It was a stage direction. A birthday party meant witnesses, the aunts, the cousins, the neighbors, everyone she'd already been rehearsing this exact story in front of for 5 straight weeks. Family first meant the agenda for the afternoon. Put it behind us meant the ending had already been fully written before I'd even opened the envelope. In front of 18 people, Mara comes back into the fold, and anyone who's heard any version at all of the laptop story gets to see with their own eyes that it all worked out fine in the end, because there's Mara eating cake like nothing ever happened. If I declined, I became the woman who boycotted a 15-year-old's birthday over a gadget. Heads, she wins. Tails, I'm the villain of the story either way. She believed completely that it would work because it had always worked every single time for as long as I'd been alive. 20 years of family gatherings, and I had never once made a scene, never once told an inconvenient truth in a room full of witnesses, because the room had always been her home field before. She'd never had to prepare for an away game in her life, because I had never once shown up to play one. She was inviting me back onto it one final time, absolutely certain of the score before the first guest even arrived. Then Todd texted that same afternoon and removed my last remaining doubt about whether any of this had been coordinated between them. Mom's giving Cole a big surprise at the party.
Try not to make it about you.
A winking emoji underneath it, the second one my brother had sent me that entire spring. I typed back one line. What surprise. He left me on read for 4 hours, which for Todd counts as a genuinely disciplined silence, and then finally sent, just come and be normal for once, which told me almost as much as an actual answer would have. I found out what the surprise actually was for my father during our regular Sunday phone call. A $500 check, presented publicly to the grandson with a future, her words already fully rehearsed for the moment. She was planning to stand up in front of 18 people, retell the whole mythology one more time with a physical check as her prop, and then turn to me for my part in it, my scene, which meant every single element I needed was about to be assembled in one room, at her own expense, entirely on her own schedule. The audience. The narrative, spoken out loud one final time, for good measure. And a stage, already built and waiting. I told Ren about the invitation that same evening, laying out exactly what I thought was actually about to happen at that party, because I decided somewhere along the way that she'd earned the full picture rather than a softened version of it. She listened all the way through without interrupting, the same careful attention she gives a plot twist she's trying to get ahead of, and when I finished she asked only one question. Are we going to win? I told her I didn't think of it as winning or losing, exactly, just as finally being honest in a room that had never once allowed it. She considered that answer, clearly unsatisfied with it, and said, okay, but I still think we're going to win. I RSVP'd yes that same night. 2 words. We'll be there. Then I opened the locked drawer and my preparations took exactly 20 minutes, and I want you to see how genuinely small they actually were. The original store receipt from August, serial number printed clearly across the top. 2 sheets of paper straight off my own printer. The marketplace listing at $950, Todd's kitchen counter, like new, barely used, selling for my son, cash only, can meet today. And the message thread where Pam had bought it, dated March the 21st, my own brother's cheerful sentences preserved forever in gray text bubbles. I put every page into a blue folder, in order. I have thought a great deal, since, about the specific power of putting things in order. The laptop itself went into my canvas tote bag, dent and all. Ren watched me pack it all from the doorway. I hadn't actually planned on bringing her at all. Every single instinct, I had wanted her nowhere near that room when it finally happened. But she came and stood beside the table anyway, and she put her hand flat against the tote bag, right over the shape of the machine inside it. It's my laptop, Mom. Steady eyes. Her father's chin, and my own stubbornness sitting right behind it. I should be there when it comes home. We negotiated the terms of it like two adults, which broke my heart a little and mended a different part of it at the same time. She would stay next to her grandfather the whole time. She would not say one single word, no matter what got said to her or about her in that room. And if it ever got to be too much for her, she'd squeeze my hand twice and go wait quietly on the porch, no questions asked afterward. She agreed to every term without pushing back on one of them, and then added exactly one of her own. If Cole looks like he needs somebody, I get to go stand by him instead. That one's not up for negotiating. I told her that one was non-negotiable on my end too, and we shook on it at the kitchen table like we were closing a real deal, because in every way that mattered, we were, and I remember thinking, watching her small hand disappear into mine for the handshake, that I had somehow raised a daughter capable of drafting fairer terms than most of the adults in our family had ever managed. Then she went to bed, and I stood alone in my kitchen with the tote bag by the door. 3.5 pounds. That's the spec sheet weight of a 15-inch MacBook Air, and I've quoted that exact number across the counter to customers probably 100 times over 6 years. I zipped the bag shut and lifted it, and I promise you, it did not weigh 3.5 pounds that night. It weighed 9 days and 5 weeks combined. It weighed $320 of babysitting money and 14 straight Fridays of silence. I set it down by the front door, and did not sleep very much at all that night. If you've ever sat up the night before you finally told a hard truth to your own family, you already know exactly how long that particular kind of night runs. Tell me down in the comments how you slept the night before yours. I'll be reading every single one. Saturday, April the 25th, was one of those bright, chilly Ohio spring afternoons that can't quite decide yet whether it's still winter. I sat in my parents' driveway for almost a full minute before turning off the engine, the tote bag on the passenger seat beside Ren, both of us watching balloons bob against the mailbox through the windshield like nothing unusual was about to happen inside that house. Ready? I asked her, mostly to hear my own voice sound steadier out loud than it felt. Ready, she said, and unbuckled her seatbelt before I'd even finished the word. My parents' house had balloons tied to the mailbox. Inside, it was full, 18 people. I counted them twice because counting is what I do with my hands when the rest of me is nervous. Aunts and cousins, neighbors from both sides of the street. My mother's cousin Francine down from Cleveland holding court beside the coffee urn like she'd been assigned a spot. A folding table sagged under a pile of presents. In the kitchen, a sheet cake with blue frosting read Happy 15th, Cole. I noticed, walking in, that my mother had set the whole thing up almost exactly like Ren's own birthday party the previous fall. Same rented folding chairs from the same party supply place, same brand of lemonade in the same glass dispenser, and I remember thinking, for one unguarded second before I caught myself, how strange it was that the woman capable of that particular blindness about her grandchildren was also, apparently, a creature of consistent habit in every other visible way. My mother met us at the door with their kisses. "So glad you finally came to your senses, dear," she murmured, just for my ears, warm and hostess bright at the same time. I smiled and told her the party looked lovely, because it did, and because every single word I saved in that first hour standing in her doorway was a word I would still have later, when it actually mattered. We gave Cole his real present early, a good pair of headphones, the kind he'd mentioned once, almost in passing, at Christmas. He held them and looked at me a beat too long. "Thanks, Aunt Mara." Something careful moved behind his face. He'd been carrying his own piece of all this for 3 straight weeks since that backstep at Easter, and carrying things quietly, it turns out, runs on both sides of his family, not just the side that talks about it. The tote bag went under my chair. Ren stationed herself beside her grandfather on the couch, exactly as we'd agreed. My father caught my eye across the room once, just once, and gave me a single small nod before going back to his coffee. They did the cake. They sang. Cole blew out his candles and pretended not to be embarrassed by the singing, and for a little while, it actually was just a boy's birthday party, and I let it be one because he genuinely deserved that much before anything else happened. Then my mother stood up and tapped her wine glass with a spoon, and the room obediently went quiet, and the real performance began. She was good. I want that fact on the record, clearly stated. My mother working a room has always been genuinely good at what it does. She talked about family, about sacrifice, about believing in children before the rest of the world learns to, about how some investments never once show up on a bank statement. I sat there with my hand resting on the tote bag under my chair, feeling the shape of the laptop through the canvas, and I remember thinking, very clearly, that I still had one last chance to simply let this pass. Say something kind, let the check get handed over, drive home with my daughter, and never open that folder at all. I want you to know that door was genuinely still open right up until the second I actually stood up. I didn't take it, but it was there. And then she produced, from beside the gift table, an envelope, and from the envelope a check, and she held it up so the whole room could see the amount printed on it. $500. To the grandson with a future, she announced, and the applause that followed was warm and easy and completely unearned. Cole stared down at the check in his own lap, like it might go off in his hands. This boy, my mother went on, building toward it now, uses his laptop every single day for school. Every single day. And that's when she turned. Here it came. The entire point of the party laid bare, her eyes finding me across the room with 18 witnesses attached to the moment.
Now, Mara.
Say something nice, and let's end this. The room turned along with her. 18 faces, some kind, some merely curious, all of them waiting patiently for me to be reasonable one more time. I have been the reasonable woman in front of that exact audience my entire life. The pressure of it is a physical thing, almost like altitude, and for one strange half-second I actually saw myself at 8 years old again, dragging that lemonade table across the grass alone rather than ask for help, performing independence for an audience that had never once offered to lift the other end. I felt the pressure settle over the whole room and changed nothing about my next move, because pressure only actually works on people who haven't already finished packing. I stood up. You're right, Mom. My voice came out low and even, and the room relaxed by half a degree. The way I held breath. Finally, let's go. Let's end it. I bent down, unzipped the tote, and set my daughter's MacBook down on the table, right next to the birthday cake. The crescent dent caught the overhead light. The pale ghost of a peeled sticker sat beside it, axolotl-shaped, unmistakable to anyone who'd ever actually looked closely at it. The machine lay there between the frosting and the paper plates, and 18 people looked at it, and nobody in that entire room breathed for a solid 3 seconds. There's a specific kind of silence only a completely full room can make. I had never once heard it before that afternoon. I heard it clearly then. Somewhere behind me, a fork touched a plate and stopped halfway. One of the little cousins, too young to understand what was happening, asked in a small voice why everyone had gone quiet and got shushed immediately by an aunt who hadn't looked away from the table once. Then maybe someone can tell me, I said, into that silence, why Cole's everyday laptop has been sitting in my house since March the 21st. My mother's face did several things in quick succession. Confusion first, genuine, blinking confusion, because whatever she'd braced herself for walking into that party, it had not been the actual physical object itself. Then recognition. Then, because my mother's instincts have never once included retreat as an option, attack. You stole it, she said, finding her footing fast. I bought it. I opened the blue folder and drew out the first page. Ask Todd who sold it to me. I laid the printed listing down on the table beside the laptop, facing the room. The photograph of the machine sitting on his own kitchen counter. The price, $950. His own words underneath it. Like new, barely used, selling for my son, cash only can meet today. Then the second page beside it, the message thread, dated March the 21st, the friendly gray bubbles back and forth. My son outgrew it. Kid's a genius, always upgrading. Francine reached the pages first. She read them with her glasses pushed down her nose, and I watched the exact moment her face changed, and then the pages started moving hand to hand around the room, and the whole gathering began, very quietly, to change owners in real time. I stood still and let the paper do the actual work for me. The neighbor from 2 doors down read over an aunt's shoulder, one hand rising slowly to cover her own mouth. Somebody whispered March 21st out loud like it was a date carved onto a headstone. My mother reached for the pages twice, and both times they were already in somebody else's hands, which had never once happened to her at her own table before in her entire life. The story, physically, was out of her reach, circulating now without her permission. Todd tried the last door available to him. Okay, this is family business. He raised his voice a notch, aiming for authority and landing somewhere closer to panic. We're not doing this at a kid's birthday party. You toasted it at a kid's birthday party, I said. Francine didn't even look up from the listing in her hands. She simply turned the page over, checked the back the careful way older women read absolutely everything. We've been the audience for this laptop for a solid month, honey. I think we're allowed to read the actual program. Nobody laughed. It wasn't a joke. It was a jury quietly deciding it had every right to deliver it. My mother's mouth opened and closed once without any sound coming out of it, which I had genuinely never once seen happen to her in 37 years of being her daughter. She looked, for just a moment, less like the woman who'd built this whole party, and more like someone watching her own house catch fire from the wrong side of the street, unable to figure out which door to run toward first. 9 days, I said. That's how long the laptop actually lasted after that dinner in March. 9 days, and then it was cash in a parking lot. Todd stood up. He'd gone very still in the corner of the room since the machine first hit the table, and now he came forward with both hands out, palms down. The exact gesture of a man trying to calm an invisible dog that isn't actually there. Okay, this looks, I was upgrading it for him. It's a whole thing, with the trade in values you wouldn't. You never gave me anything to upgrade. The voice was low, and it cracked right down the middle, and it came from the couch. Cole, standing now, the birthday check still in one hand, looking at his own father with an expression I sincerely hope I never have to see on a child's face again as long as I live. The look of a kid doing the very last piece of arithmetic on someone he loves. I had it one night, Dad. The room had gone dead silent all over again. One night. Then you took it back. You said you had to install stuff on it. His voice steadied as it went, like it had been waiting years for exactly this floor to stand on. There's no new laptop. There was never going to be a new laptop. Nobody had asked him to speak. I want that understood clearly. I had promised myself, twice over, that no part of any of this would ever land on that boy's shoulders. And he stood up entirely on his own, 15 years old as of the candles he'd blown out less than an hour earlier, and he chose the truth, in front of 18 people, without a single push for me. I have never in my life been prouder of a child who wasn't even mine. Francine, still holding the listing, looked up over her glasses at my mother and asked the question. She asked it kindly. Sometimes the kind ones turn out to be the actual detonators. But Evelyn, what about his coding academy? Cole answered before his own grandmother could get a single word out. Quiet and completely final. There's no academy, Grandma. There never was. I watched 68 years of certainty leave my mother's face over the course of about 4 seconds. She looked at Cole. She looked at the laptop. She looked at Todd, and I could see her mind reaching for the next story, any story at all, the way a drowning person reaches for anything floating nearby, and finding, for the first time in her entire adult life, absolutely nothing left on the shelf to grab. That's when my father stood up. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't ask the room for its attention. The room simply gave itself over to him on its own, because Frank Marsh standing up at a family gathering was already, by a wide margin, the loudest thing that had happened there all afternoon. He took the register out of his jacket pocket, soft, swollen at the spine, opened it to a pencil-ticked page, and read it out flat and unhurried, a machinist reading off tolerances to a room that had no choice but to listen. Cole tutoring, $250. Cole coding, $200 monthly. Camp, $600. He turned one more page. He looked up. $6,800. 2 years. He closed the register. I count things, he said, to the room, by way of the only explanation he apparently felt he owed anyone. For 46 years. It's simply what I do. Then he sat back down beside Ren and put his own hand gently over his granddaughter's hand. And that small, entirely mechanical motion was the exact moment the coalition that had quietly run my family for 4 decades came apart, right there beside the coffee urn. My mother rounded on my brother next. Not on me. Somewhere in the last 4 minutes I had become, apparently, irrelevant to the main event, which was precisely what I had planned for, and still somehow found startling to actually watch happen in real time. 2 years of checks, Todd. Her voice was shaking now, and rising with it. The tutors. The academy. I told everyone. I wrote you a check at Christmas. In front of your sister. You made me the favorite, Mom. It tore straight out of him. My brother's face had gone red and helpless all at once, and what came out of him next was the single truest sentence I have ever heard him say in 41 years, and it explained our entire shared childhood in exactly 9 words. I had to keep being him. The room did not move. You told me his Chromebook died, she said. That's why, at dinner you said. Because you told me it died. You wanted a reason. You've always wanted a reason. He was unraveling now in real time, arms spread wide. The words sprang out toward her without any aim left in them at all. I give you the reasons, Mom. That's the job. That's been the job my whole life. His voice cracked and dropped lower. You remember the science fair, 6th grade? I didn't build that volcano. Dad built half of it at midnight because I was crying about it and you told the whole church it was all me. I learned that you're exactly what you wanted to hear. I've just been building you volcanoes ever since. And there it was, laid bare in front of 18 witnesses without my having to say one more word about it. That dinner back in March had never once been an impulse on his part. He'd loaded her like a spring, coiled and waiting. Chromebook died again. Some kids get the good machines. Aimed her directly at my daughter's laptop, knowing exactly what she would do with it, because he'd spent his entire adult life learning precisely where her trigger sat. She took the machine. He took the money. My daughter took the damage in between the two of them. My mother stood in the middle of her own party, with her whole mythology in pieces across the cake table, and she reached for the very last thing left in her repertoire. She turned to the smallest person in the room. Ren. Her voice went soft, urgent. grandmother-shaped all at once. She took one step toward the couch, hand already extending. "Sweetheart, you know Grandma loves." Ren stood up and took one single step back and stood beside her grandfather instead. She didn't say a word. She'd promised me she wouldn't, and she kept every part of that promise. One step. That was her entire statement for the whole afternoon, and it landed harder than anything sitting in my blue folder ever could have. My mother's hand hung there, in the air a moment too long. And then I spoke because now, finally, it was time. "In March, you told her. Touch it again, and I'm not your grandma." I kept my voice exactly where it had been all afternoon, low and level and entirely unhurried. "She never touched it again. Not once. You made that rule, Mom. We've simply been living by it ever since." I let that sit for one full breath. "I told you to keep that sentence," I said. "Today is later." Nobody in that room moved. My mother looked at me the way you look at a stranger, wearing a face you used to know very well. And maybe that was fair in the end, because the daughter she'd always known, the one who absorbed, who quietly paid, who got over things right on schedule, was simply not standing in that room with her anymore. I laid out the last of it plainly, not as a speech, but as terms. "Here's how it goes from now on. No more money talk between us, of any kind. No loans, no chip-ins, no bills passed around the table. No more ranking children in my hearing, ever again. Ren decides when she wants to see you, and how often. That's all there is." I looked at Cole, still standing, the check loose in his hand. "My door is open for you. Any Saturday you want. You didn't do one single thing wrong here." Cole looked down at the $500 in his own hand. Then he leaned over, set it flat on the table, and slid it slowly across the tablecloth toward his grandmother, unhurried enough that everyone in the room could watch it travel the whole distance. "Put it toward what Dad owes you," he said. I picked up the laptop. I took my daughter's hand. We walked through 18 completely silent people, and not one of them stopped us, and not one of them said a single word the whole way to the door. My father was somehow already there ahead of us, holding it open. He walked us all the way down to the car himself. The balloons on the mailbox bobbed once in the wind as we passed them. "I'll be by Sunday," he said. "Tomatoes." We drove home with the windows down the whole way. Nobody said anything the entire drive. Nobody needed to. That night, after I tucked her in, Ren came and found me in the kitchen still holding the empty tote bag, and she asked me, very quietly, whether Cole was going to be okay. Not whether I was okay. Not whether Grandma was going to apologize. Whether her cousin, who she'd barely been allowed to know for most of her own childhood, was going to be all right after standing up in front of everyone like that. I told her I honestly didn't know yet, but that he'd done something very brave, and that brave things usually turn out all right eventually, even when it doesn't feel that way the same night. She nodded, satisfied enough with that answer to go back to bed, and I stood alone in my kitchen a while longer, thinking about how my 12-year-old's first instinct, walking away from the worst family gathering of her life, had been to worry about someone else's kid instead of her own laptop. You might be waiting for the part where sirens show up somewhere in the story. There are no sirens coming. I promised my father, don't burn her down, just stop the lying, and the truth is, no fire I could have set myself that afternoon would have done what the plain truth did entirely on its own, just by sitting out in the open where 18 people finally got to see it clearly. Here's what actually happened in the weeks that followed, and I want you to notice, in every single piece of it, whose choices caused it. Not mine. I didn't file a single report, demand a single thing, or call one more person after that party. I went home and made dinner that same night, same as always, grilled cheese and tomato soup, Ren's request, eaten at our own kitchen table with absolutely nothing left unsaid, hanging over either one of us for the first time in over a month. The checks stopped first. My father told me that on a Sunday, matter of fact, over coffee, the way he tells me most things. "She closed the joint account down to one signature," he said, stirring his coffee slower than the stirring actually required.
"Mine."
First time in 46 years. He didn't say it like a victory. He said it like a fact he was still getting used to the shape of, turning it over the same unhurried way he turns over a pencil tick in his register. My mother had closed the faucet entirely. No more tutoring money, no more academy money, no more anything money moving in Todd's direction at all. Not because anyone had forced her hand on it directly, but because every check she wrote now had 18 witnesses attached to it inside her own head, whether they were standing in the room with her or not. My mother has never once in her life feared being wrong about anything. She fears being seen being wrong. It turns out that was the only lock that had ever actually fit her. The second thing I found entirely on my own during an ordinary Tuesday market sweep 3 weeks after the party. I typed my usual searches, scrolled my usual listings, and there it was for miles away. Chrome rims. Like new.
Need gone this week.
Cash only. Todd's rims, Todd's exact phrasing, like new. The man apparently has a signature style whether he realizes it or not. And Todd's photograph, taken at the very same curb. With the faucet closed for good and a truck payment still coming due every month, My brother had gone right back to the same marketplace where he'd once sold his own son's future, except this time the only thing he had left to sell was his own shine. I sat at my counter and looked at that listing for a long moment. I didn't feel any real triumph looking at it. I felt like I was simply watching gravity finish doing its job on schedule. I showed Deb the listing without a word of context. She read it, glanced up at me over her reading glasses, and said, "You want me to make an offer on this one too?" I told her no, this one wasn't mine to fix. She nodded like that made complete sense to her, closed the tab, and went back to pricing a stack of tablets someone had dropped off that morning, and that was the whole conversation. Deb has never once asked me for the full ending to the story. I think she already understood better than most people I know that some chapters you help someone survive, and then you simply let them keep the rest for themselves. She did bring me a slice of her own lemon cake the following Monday, unprompted, set it on my side of the counter without a word, and went back to work. I understood that for exactly what it was. Todd moved into a smaller apartment on the north side that same June. Alone, the truck eventually traded down for something with a payment he could actually make. I don't know much else about his life now beyond what Cole occasionally mentions in passing, usually without being asked. I'm told he's working steadily at a cousin's landscaping company and that he calls Cole most Wednesdays, and that the calls are short and mostly about nothing. I have no interest in either punishing him further or rushing to forgive him. Both of those would require more of my attention than I'm willing to keep spending on him. I hope, in some distant, uncomplicated way, that he eventually becomes a man his own son doesn't have to protect other people from. Whether he does is entirely his business now, not mine. I thought, sitting there, about the 10-speed bicycle he got at 9 years old for one good semester, and about the invisible ledger our mother had apparently been keeping on him his entire life too, just running in the opposite direction from mine, praise instead of silence, a story that had to keep performing instead of one that was allowed to just quietly be reliable. Understanding where that pressure came from didn't make me feel 1 ounce of forgiveness toward him. He was 41 years old. He'd had every chance in the world to put that ledger down on his own, and simply chose not to. But I stopped being surprised by him after that, and surprise, it turns out, had been costing me more than I realized. The phone calls surprised me more than either of those two things. Francine called from Cleveland 2 days after the party. "We always wondered, honey," she said, and then went quiet for a moment. For years, nobody wanted to be the one who said it first. She told me, almost as an afterthought, that she'd once asked Cole directly at a family reunion 3 summers back how his coding classes were going, and he'd given her such a blank, uncertain answer that she'd assumed at the time he was simply shy about bragging on himself. She said she'd thought about that exact conversation almost nonstop since the party, which taught me something I'm still turning over even now. My mother's version of our family had never actually been as airtight from the outside as it always felt from where I was standing inside it. The audience had carried its own doubts along the whole time. They'd simply been waiting, the same way I had been, for somebody else to go first. Then in early May the letter came. 2 full pages of my mother's looping cursive, and I read every single word of it twice, because I owed the truth that much attention, even coming from her. It was half apology and half invoice at the same time, a paragraph acknowledging how things had looked at the party, followed immediately by an itemized accounting of her own sacrifices going all the way back to my childhood, laid out like love was a balance I'd somehow failed to keep current on my end. She mentioned the winter coat she bought me in 8th grade. She mentioned driving me to a debate tournament in 2003 in an ice storm. She did not mention the water heater, or the vending machines, or the $2,000 that never came back, because in her version of the ledger, only one direction of generosity had ever actually counted. But there was one sentence near the very end that I've kept, because it's the single most honest thing my mother has ever written down to me, and I genuinely don't think she realizes it even now. I only ever wanted this family to look right. Look right. Not be right. 40 years of my entire family explained in exactly 6 words.
She wrote it as a defense.
It reads, every time I go back to it, like a confession instead. I wrote back 6 lines of my own. No heat in any of them. Terms don't need heat behind them to hold. The door isn't closed, Mom. Money stays out of it, permanently. The ranking of grandchildren ends, permanently. Ren's time with you is Ren's to give, on her own terms. When you're ready for that particular version of us, it's here waiting. 6 lines, and I signed it, Mara, and I felt the strangest sensation dropping that envelope into the mailbox slot. Not victory. Lightness. The very specific lightness of setting down something heavy you hadn't even fully realized you'd been carrying with both hands the whole time. Then there was Cole. The first Saturday in May, a bicycle turned into my driveway. My nephew, 15 years old, helmet hair sticking up in 3 directions, standing on my porch not quite knowing what to do with his own arms. You said any Saturday, he said, like he was double-checking the fine print on an offer he half expected to have expired already. I made him a sandwich before we did anything else. Because that's what you do with a 15-year-old who rode for miles to see if an invitation was actually real, and we sat on my back steps eating in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable so much as unfamiliar. Eventually he asked, not quite looking at me, "Is Grandma okay?" I told him honestly that I didn't fully know yet, that some things take longer to answer than a Saturday afternoon allows for. He nodded like that was a fair answer, which told me he'd probably already guessed as much on his own bike ride over. He's come by nearly every Saturday since. Here's what we actually do, because I thought hard about what would genuinely help him instead of just handing him more charity with a bow tied on top of it. I brought home one of our refurbished laptops from the shop and sold it to him. Sold, not given, at the employee discount price. He pays me $4 a week out of his own allowance, and there is an actual receipt, and his own signature sits on it. You have genuinely never seen a 15-year-old look at a piece of paper the way Cole looked at that receipt the first time I handed it to him. He folded it in half and then in half again and put it in his wallet behind his school ID, where, as far as I know, it still lives. The first thing in his entire life that was officially, documentably, provably his. I've started teaching him the trade, a little at a time. How to read a serial number properly. How to spot water damage hiding under a keyboard before it shows up anywhere else. How to price something honestly, instead of how you wish it were worth. What a dent actually costs a machine's value, and what a lie costs it instead. 2 Saturdays ago, he was turning a battered old trade-in over in his hands, inspecting the corners the exact way I'd shown him, and he asked, not looking up, "So the dents don't kill the value?" "No, bud," I told him. "The lies do." He nodded slowly, filing that away somewhere a good deal deeper than trade-in policy. The grandchild who will actually do something with his life. My mother said it once as a coronation, and it very nearly crushed the boy underneath it. Somewhere between my own counter and his $4 weekly payments, that exact sentence is quietly coming true anyway, just smaller and slower, and finally real instead of borrowed. Ren is usually home on those Saturdays too, and the two of them have settled into an easy, wordless kind of cousinship that neither one of them ever really got the chance to have before this year, given how carefully the family's dinner table always kept them at opposite ends of it. She reads him chapters sometimes while he works at my kitchen table on whatever machine I've handed him that week. He doesn't pretend to follow the plot as closely as her actual readers do, but he listens all the way through every time, and once, unprompted, he told her the lighthouse in Chapter 12 reminded him of the water tower behind his old middle school, which is about as close to literary criticism as a 15-year-old boy is capable of offering, and Ren, delighted, wrote the water tower into Chapter 16 2 days later without telling him she'd done it. He found it on his own, reading over her shoulder, and went very quiet, and then asked if he could be in the next one too. She's still deciding, she tells me. She likes making him wait for it. I know Ren's shoe size now too, for what it's worth, and her favorite lunch, and the specific way she likes her pancakes stacked. I didn't need a grandmother's memory trick to learn any of it. I just started asking, and then I actually listened to the answers. My father comes by on Sundays, same as he said he would. Tomatoes all summer long. The brandywine seedlings from that coffee can went into my own garden after the last frost, which felt at the time like planting the whole story and daring it to grow into something better than where it started. He still lives with my mother. He still loves her. He told me all 3 of those things at once at my kitchen table back in April, and he meant every part of it. But the counting happens at my table now, whenever I ask him to do it out loud, under my own kitchen light instead of hers. That small relocation is about as close to a formal declaration as my father is ever going to make about anything, and I've stopped expecting a bigger one from him. One Sunday, Ren set her laptop down in front of him and pressed play on a file. The family history interview, March the 8th, recovered whole from the backup, every single second of it intact. My father watched himself laugh on the screen. "Grease and pennies," his recorded voice said. 30 years. And my actual father, sitting on my actual couch, laughed right along at his own laugh. When the recording got to the part about the jig and the 12th try holding, he shook his head at himself on the screen and said, mostly to himself, "Forgot I told her about the wedding line. Your mother's going to hear about that eventually." He didn't sound worried about it. He sounded, for possibly the first time all year, like a man who'd stopped keeping careful track of which truths were safe to let out into the room. Ren recorded that too because the project, she informed us both very seriously, is ongoing now. The very first thing that machine ever managed to capture was my father's own joy. It left our house 9 days later in a stranger's hands, and it came home again carrying that same joy completely intact the whole time, untouched. My father mentioned, almost as an aside that same Sunday, that he'd finally straightened the crooked school photo of Ren that had been hanging in their guest room for 3 years. The one nobody but him ever seemed to notice was even off-center. Picture hook needed resetting, was all he offered by way of explanation. It wasn't an apology, not in so many words. My father doesn't really do those. But I noticed, the next time I happened to be in that house, that it was hanging perfectly straight and that he'd moved it 6 inches closer to eye level while he was at it. Machines keep records. Sometimes, mercifully, of the good things too. And then it was Friday, May the 1st. Ren didn't announce it ahead of time. That's exactly how I knew it actually mattered to her. She simply disappeared into her room after dinner with the laptop and both purple ink notebooks, and when I looked in around 7:30, she was typing, transcribing chapter 15 at last, weeks of handwritten pages finally flowing onto the right keyboard, the callus on her middle finger officially off duty for the evening. Before she posted it, she did one more thing. From her desk drawer, she took out a brand new sticker, another axolotl, this one purple because of course it was, and she peeled it and pressed it carefully onto the lid, deliberately overlapping the pale ghost of the old one instead of covering it over completely.
So you can see both, she said.
The one that got taken and the one that came after. My 12-year-old put the entire story of that whole year onto the lid of a laptop in the width of one sticker, and then she straightened up and hit publish at exactly 8 o'clock, 14 weeks late, and, somehow, right on time all at once. The comments started arriving inside of 10 minutes. The one at the very top in all capital letters, from the reader who threatens riots. She's back, and chapter 15 was worth every single week of waiting. Ren read the comments with her knees pulled up to her chest and the screen light washing across her face, and she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen from her since the very first week of March. Unguarded, genuinely greedy for it. 12 years old, and 3,000 strangers had kept her seat warm the entire time without asking anything of her in return. Not one of them knows what any of it actually weighed while she was carrying it. All of them got, in exchange, the best chapters she has ever written in her life. And I've read every one of them myself since, so I can tell you honestly that the girl in her story, who talks to lighthouses, spends this particular chapter learning that some voices only sound enormous because you've been quietly taught to stand too close to them your whole life. It's not about anybody, she told me when I asked. Writers lie about that part all the time. Then she grinned. It's the only lying I'll allow in this house. By the end of that same week, her follower count had crossed 3,200 for the first time, mostly new readers who'd found the story through somebody sharing that top comment around. The one about rioting. Ren checked the number exactly once, nodded like it confirmed something she'd already suspected about herself, and went right back to drafting chapter 16 without mentioning it again. When I asked her, half joking, if the growing readership had gone to her head at all, she looked at me like the question genuinely confused her. They're not reading it for me, Mom. They're reading it for the lighthouse girl. I've thought about that distinction more than once since, the quiet difference between being loved for who you actually are and being loved for the character you've learned to perform, and how my 12-year-old had somehow already sorted that difference out for herself, in public, in front of 3,000 strangers, before I'd fully sorted it out for myself in front of 6 people at a dinner table. I sat outside on my own back step one evening that same week, after Ren had gone to bed, and let myself actually take stock of the whole year for the first time since it had started, rather than just surviving each piece of it as it arrived. 2 months since the dinner. 6 weeks since the party. A brother I barely spoke to now, a mother I loved at a careful distance, a father I finally understood, and a nephew who rode his bike to my house most Saturdays like it was the most natural thing in the world. None of it felt like victory, exactly, sitting out there, in the cooling evening air. It felt more like the stillness that settles over my counter at the end of a long shift, once every machine has finally been matched to its true owner and every drawer balances out to the exact penny it's supposed to. Quiet and correct and entirely unglamorous, and worth more to me that evening than almost anything else that whole year had offered. 9 days after that, the calendar handed me one final test. The second Sunday in May, Mother's Day, my mother was hosting her usual brunch. I heard about it secondhand from Francine, the full production, flowers already ordered, the family summoned one more time to help the whole thing look right. A year earlier, I would have gone. I would have bought a card that said things I didn't fully mean and sat in my usual chair and absorbed the whole afternoon because that had always been the job description. This year, I sent one text message in the morning. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. We're spending it at home this year. No anger in it anywhere. That's the part one needs you to actually hear. I didn't send it as a punishment, and I don't withhold myself from my mother now as any kind of revenge. It's simpler than that and quieter. I finally put myself and my daughter where we actually live, instead of standing where the family story had always needed the two of us to stand for its own sake. My mother spent Mother's Day with her flowers and her brunch, and whoever chose to show up for it. I genuinely hope, without any irony attached, that it was a nice afternoon for her. She's 68 years old, and she is learning later than most people and slower than some that being believed and being right were never actually the same thing. That particular lesson doesn't require my attendance to land. I spent the morning in my own kitchen with Ren, making pancakes. She built a stack 3 high and crowned the whole thing with a leftover birthday candle dug out of the junk drawer from some party years back, lit it, and told me to make a wish. I looked at my daughter across a candle stuck in a Tuesday quality pancake, on the best Mother's Day I've had in years, and I honestly couldn't think of a single thing left to ask for. You're not sad she's not here? Ren asked me at one point, syrup halfway to her mouth, watching my face carefully the way she does when she's genuinely checking on me rather than just making conversation. A little, I told her honestly because I try not to lie to her about the parts that are actually true, but not sad enough to trade this for it. She seemed to accept that as a complete and satisfactory answer, which is more than I can say for most of the adults I've explained that same feeling to since. Then I called my father, and we talked about tomatoes for 10 minutes straight, which for the two of us counts as practically a parade. In my line of work, I've learned to spot a forgery from 3 feet away before I've even touched it. The paper sits too smooth, the signature leans the wrong direction, the whole story just doesn't match the serial number stamped underneath it. It only took me 37 years to finally run that same test on my own family. When it didn't match, when none of it ever really had, I learned how to walk away from the sale, instead of talking myself into it one more time. That's the whole trade, really, whether you're standing behind a counter or sitting at somebody's dinner table. You don't have to fight the story. You just have to stop paying full price for one that was never true to begin with. So that's the story. And if you've stayed with me this far, I think I know exactly why. I think you already know this family, or one enough like it. Maybe you're the one who is always fine on your own, the reliable one, the one who pays, who fixes, who forgives right on schedule, who keeps the peace by quietly swallowing your own half of every unfair thing that ever happened at that table. Because somebody taught you early, and taught you often, that being easy to mistreat was the same thing as being strong. It isn't. It took me 37 years and my own daughter's face at a dinner table to finally learn the difference. So let me hand it to you for free right now, since it cost me considerably more than that. I think about Ren a great deal these days, and about what she's actually going to carry forward from this whole year once she's my age. Not the laptop. Not even the party, really, though I imagine she'll tell some version of that story for the rest of her life. I think she's going to remember that the year her own grandmother tried to price her at zero was also the year her mother stood up in a room full of people and said, out loud, that she was worth considerably more than that. I'd like to think that's the actual inheritance in the story, the one that doesn't show up on anybody's check register. Not the laptop. The evidence that somebody finally fought for her, once, in a room that mattered. Strength was never about how much disrespect you could absorb without flinching. It's about how calmly you can finally stop absorbing it. You don't have to burn one single thing down. You don't have to scream, or win the argument, or make anyone pay you back in front of witnesses. You can simply, quietly stop funding the story.
Keep your receipts.
Tell the truth exactly once, in a room where it can't be talked back out of afterward. Then go home and make pancakes with the people who never once needed you to be smaller for their comfort. If some part of this found the bruise you've been carrying, if you've ever been the invisible one, or you're currently raising a child you've refused to let become the invisible one, tell me down in the comments. I read every single one of them myself. This community exists because none of us got believed the first time we said it out loud. And every story like this one makes the next person's just a little bit easier to finally tell. Share it with somebody who's still standing too close to a loud voice in their own life, and subscribe so you're here for the next family that finally stops keeping the wrong kind of peace with itself. One more thing, and then I'll let you go for tonight. The first ripe brandy wine came in on a Tuesday in late July, heavier and stranger shaped than any tomato I'd ever bought at a store, exactly the way my father warned me they'd be. I cut it into wedges and salted it and ate it standing over the kitchen sink, and it tasted like absolutely nothing I could have picked up at Gear Swap or anywhere else with a price tag attached to it, because some things only ever grow correctly on their own timeline, no matter how badly you want to speed them along. Last Friday night, I passed by Ren's room, and her door was open. She was writing with the machine balanced on her knees, the crescent dent catching the lamplight at an angle, 2 axolotls riding the lid together. The old ghost and the new purple one, side by side, exactly where she can see them both at once. She didn't notice me standing there. She was somewhere better already, 3 chapters ahead of where she'd actually posted, typing like the keyboard genuinely owed her money. My mother taught me that in our family, love came with a ranking attached to it. My daughter taught me that it doesn't have to.